Imagine sitting in a house that finally, after 40 years, belongs entirely to your own hours. No alarm demanding you rise, no calendar dictating your worth. Just you, a cup of coffee going cold, and a silence so complete you can hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away. For the first few weeks, that silence feels like a reward you've earned. Then, one morning, without warning, it starts to feel like something else. Like the room is asking you a question you don't know how to answer. Who am I, now that no one needs me to be anywhere? That question is the wound underneath almost every difficult retirement. Not boredom, not idleness, something quieter and harder to name, the creeping sense that you have become invisible. That the phone calls come less often. That your children have their own emergencies now, and yours don't quite register the same way. That somewhere along the way, without any single dramatic moment, you slipped out of the center of your own story and into the background of everyone else's. You spent decades being counted on. A boss counted on you. Co-workers counted on you. Your children counted on you before they could tie their own shoes. And that constant demand, exhausting as it sometimes was, gave you something you didn't fully appreciate until it disappeared. Proof that you mattered to the world outside your own head. Retirement doesn't just remove your schedule, it removes the evidence. The Romans had a phrase for the particular danger hiding inside unstructured freedom. Leisure without purpose is a kind of death. Seneca wrote it to a friend who thought retirement itself would be the cure for a difficult life, and Seneca wanted him to understand something uncomfortable, that rest, on its own, restores nothing. Without direction, it hollows a person out slowly, the way water erodes stone, so gradually you don't notice until the shape of you has changed. This isn't only a poetic idea, it shows up in the data. Researchers tracking retirees across multiple decades have consistently found a jump in depression, cognitive decline, and even early mortality in the years right after people stop working, especially among those who retired from something without ever building something to retire into. The body doesn't fall apart because the job is gone. It falls apart because the reasons to rise each morning went with it. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire that spanned 3 continents, wrote privately in his journal, never intending anyone else to read it, that a person who abandons the work proper to being human is like an eye that has shut itself off from seeing, or a hand severed from the arm it belongs to. For him, purpose wasn't a luxury reserved for the ambitious. It was the very thing that kept a person attached to life. So this isn't really a video about filling time. It's about something far more urgent. How do you spend the 7, 8, 9 open hours you now have in a way that doesn't just distract you from feeling forgotten, but actually makes you someone worth remembering to yourself first, and then to everyone around you? Here are 7 practices drawn from Stoic philosophy and confirmed by what modern psychology now understands about aging, that don't merely occupy the empty hours. They rebuild the sense that you still matter. Stay through to the last one. It's the one almost nobody talks about, and it might matter more than all the others combined. Hobby 1. Walking as an act of attention. The first practice sounds almost insultingly simple. Walking. Not walking for your cardiovascular numbers, though your doctor is right to want those improved. Something older and quieter than fitness is buried inside the act of walking, something modern culture has mostly forgotten how to access. Marcus Aurelius governed the largest empire the world had seen, and yet many of his sharpest reflections were almost certainly composed while walking the frontier camps along the Danube, watching the shape of clouds shift, noticing the small, unremarkable behavior of the natural world around him. He believed that nothing in nature moves without purpose, and that a mind trained to actually notice becomes a mind that is far harder to rattle, far harder to bore, far harder to make feel small. Try this tomorrow. not as an abstract idea but as an actual experiment. Leave the phone in the house. No podcast, no music, no audiobook narrating someone else's thoughts into your ears. Walk in silence and give yourself one job. Notice 5 things you have genuinely never noticed before. The particular rust color of one leaf, a bird call you can't identify, the way morning light lands differently on a fence than it did yesterday. It sounds too small to matter, but this is close to what the Stoics called prosos, sustained, deliberate attention, and it happens to be one of the most effective tools we have for keeping an aging mind alert rather than dimming. Modern neuroscience, without ever citing a Stoic text, backs this up almost exactly. New sensory input, unfamiliar sights, sounds, textures of experience stimulates the growth of fresh neural connections, particularly in the hippocampus, the region most tied to memory. A walk on a treadmill facing a blank wall gives the brain almost nothing new to chew on. A walk where the mind is actively hunting for what it hasn't seen before gives it a feast. There's a woman I'll call Marion, whose story reached me through a viewer of this channel. She taught elementary school for 38 years and retired at 62, believing she'd finally get to rest. Within a year, she told her daughter she felt like she was quietly dissolving foggier memory, flatter mood, less of herself each month. Her daughter gave her one rule: walk every morning, no phone, no music, just looking. Marion thought it was pointless. She did it anyway, mostly to stop her daughter from worrying. 3 months later, she said something her daughter still repeats. She said the walk had become the best part of her day, not because of the exercise, but because she had started noticing again. The particular frost pattern on one hedge, the robin that returned to the same corner nest every spring. For the first time since retiring, she said, she felt curious about something. That's the whole secret, hiding inside something as ordinary as putting one foot in front of the other. It was never about the steps. It's about training a mind to stay awake to the world instead of drifting through whatever years remain. Hobby 2, reading as company that never leaves. Seneca, in his letters to his friend Lucilius, gave reading advice that almost nobody follows, even people who consider themselves devoted readers. His instruction was counterintuitive. Don't read widely. Read a small number of books deeply, again and again, until they become part of the architecture of your thinking. He compared the scattered reader to a traveler who visits 50 countries and calls none of them home, full of acquaintances, but without a single real friend. Books work the same way, he said. Skim 50 a year and retain almost nothing of substance. Return to 5, slowly, with a pencil in hand, arguing in the margins, and you'll be genuinely changed by what you've read. This matters enormously after 60, and the research on this is unusually consistent. Long-running studies on cognitive aging, including the well-known Rush Memory and Aging Project, which has followed thousands of older adults for years, have found that people who regularly engage in mentally demanding activities like sustained reading show a measurably slower rate of cognitive decline, independent of their general physical health. Genuine reading forces the brain to hold complicated ideas across pages, follow long threads of reasoning, and build vocabulary and memory at the same time. It's closer to a full-body workout for the mind than almost anything else on a shelf. But Seneca's real insight goes past brain health. He called philosophical reading a conversation with the dead, and he meant it as something comforting, not eerie. Open Marcus Aurelius, and you are, in every meaningful sense, sitting across from a man who ruled Rome 2,000 years ago, admitting his fears and his failures to you with total honesty, thoughts he wrote for no one but himself, thoughts nobody in his lifetime ever read. And now here you are, receiving them as an unearned gift across 2 millennia. For someone whose circle of friends has naturally thinned with age, and this is a real, painful fact about growing older, that our social world tends to contract even when we don't want it to. This offers something rare. An unbroken source of company that doesn't move away, doesn't get too busy, doesn't forget to call. Seneca is always there at 2 in the morning if sleep won't come. So is Epictetus. So is Marcus. If you're starting from nothing, don't reach for a dense academic translation. Begin with a plain, modern edition of Meditations. It was written as short journal entries, never intended as a formal treatise, so it reads far more like an honest diary than a lecture. Read one entry a day, just one. Ask yourself plainly, does this apply to my life right now? Keep a small notebook beside the book, and when a line strikes you, copy it out by hand. There's something about the physical motion of handwriting, a sentence that lodges it in memory in a way that passive reading never quite manages. Hobby 3: Gardening and the practice of loving what is. Nearly every culture on earth pairs old age with a garden, and there's a reason that pairing feels so natural. The Stoics had a concept called amor fati, love of fate, which doesn't mean passively accepting whatever happens to you. It means actively embracing reality exactly as it is, including its limits, its seasons, its endings. And there is no better daily teacher of that idea than a small patch of dirt. A garden does not care about your schedule or your impatience. It runs on its own clock. You cannot argue a tomato into ripening early. You cannot bully a rose into blooming through sheer stubbornness. A garden teaches you, gently but without exception, that some things are yours to control: the quality of the soil, the regularity of the water, whether a plant sits in sun or shade, and some things are not: the weather, the pests, the unpredictable moods of nature itself. This is almost word for word the opening line of Epictetus's Enchiridion. Some things are up to us, and some things are not, and peace of mind depends on knowing exactly which is which. A retired person who takes up gardening is, whether they realize it or not, enrolling in a daily masterclass on that very distinction. You do the part that belongs to you: plant, water, weed, protect, and then you let go of the outcome. Some years the harvest is generous, some years a late frost wipes out everything you planted. The Stoic gardener doesn't rage at the frost. The Stoic gardener plants again. There's also a real, measurable physical benefit here that shouldn't be understated. Gardening is low-impact, full-body movement. The bending, digging, and carrying that maintains flexibility and grip strength in a way that's gentle enough for aging joints, but demanding enough to matter. Studies on horticultural therapy have shown measurable drops in cortisol after even short sessions in the soil, and some research links direct contact with healthy soil to mild mood-elevating effects through certain naturally occurring soil bacteria. But past the biology sits a simpler emotional truth. A garden gives you a reason to walk outside every single day, rain or shine, because something out there depends on you. Purpose, in its most literal, physical form, a living thing that needs your attention and notices when it doesn't get it. I think of a retired accountant who spent his whole career making numbers balance, who took up gardening reluctantly, mostly to please his wife in the first year of retirement. He expected to hate it. Instead, he said something worth remembering. For 40 years, my job was to make numbers behave. Now, my job is to watch something grow that I can't control at all, and somehow that's more peaceful than anything I did in my career. That's amor fati in its most practical possible form. Hobby 4: the nightly examination of the self. Here's a fact that surprises most people the first time they hear it. Meditations, the most famous work of Stoic philosophy that exists, was never meant to be read by anyone. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing for future readers. He was writing to himself, likely every evening, as a discipline to hold himself accountable to a philosophy he claimed to believe in but constantly struggled to live up to. This practice, reviewing your day, your reactions, your failures, and small victories in staying steady, wasn't unique to him. Seneca describes it explicitly, crediting an earlier philosopher named Sextius with a nightly ritual. Before sleep, Sextius would ask himself what bad habit he had resisted that day, what fault he had caught himself in what way he was slightly better than the morning before. Seneca adopted the exact same habit, saying he couldn't sleep until he had held this quiet court over his own conduct. This is journaling, but with a specific and deliberate shape. Not a diary of events, an examination of character. And for someone newly retired, this solves a problem almost nobody names. Honestly, the disappearance of external accountability. At work, you had a boss, a schedule, colleagues who noticed if you slipped. Retirement removes nearly all of that scaffolding at once, and for many people, this creates a quiet drift, not from laziness, but simply because the structure that used to hold discipline in place is gone. Stoic journaling rebuilds that scaffolding, except now you are the boss, the reviewer, the source of your own accountability. Try this tonight. A plain notebook, nothing elaborate. The Stoics were suspicious of ornament, even in the tools of virtue. 3 short answers each night. First, where did I act with patience, courage, or restraint today, even when it would have been easier not to? Second, where did I fail? Where did anger, laziness, or self-pity win, written honestly but without self-punishment? Since Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that cruelty toward your own failures is itself a failure of the philosophy. Third, one specific, concrete thing you'll do differently tomorrow, not a vague resolution. 10 minutes, and over months it does something remarkable. It turns the wide-open, undifferentiated hours of retirement into a structured practice of becoming, not simply waiting out the years that remain, but deliberately shaping who you're turning into, one evening at a time, with a written record to prove it. The psychologist Erik Erikson called the central struggle of later adulthood generativity versus stagnation, the sense that your life is still contributing, still oriented toward something beyond mere survival, versus the quiet dread that it isn't. A nightly Stoic journal is, in effect, a small deliberate weapon against stagnation, wielded 10 minutes at a time. Hobby 5 craftsmanship and the discipline of the hands. Epictetus was born a slave. Long before he became one of the most influential philosophers of his era, he lived among tradesmen and craftsmen, and some historians believe that early exposure shaped the way he taught. He returns constantly to the metaphor of the skilled carpenter or sculptor, someone whose hands and judgment have been trained together over years until excellence becomes almost automatic. Woodworking, pottery, metalwork, instrument repair, leatherwork, the specific craft matters less than the shape of the activity itself, because craftsmanship offers something almost nothing else in retirement can match: immediate, honest, undeniable feedback. Wood doesn't lie to you. If a joint is imprecise, it won't fit. If a measurement is off, the piece won't stand straight. There's no ambiguity to interpret, no office politics to navigate, no vague social signal to decode. You either did it correctly or you didn't, and the material tells you the truth every time. For people who spent decades in careers full of unclear feedback and the exhausting work of managing other people's opinions, this is an enormous relief. A craft hands you a relationship with reality that is completely honest. It also matters for the aging brain in a specific, well-documented way. The fine motor control required in carving, sanding, shaping, and joining activates and strengthens neural pathways tied to the motor cortex and cerebellum regions, particularly vulnerable to age-related decline. Occupational therapists often recommend craft work specifically for older adults because it combines dexterity, spatial reasoning, planning, and patience within a single activity. Seneca wrote about the value of a steady hand, mirroring a steady mind, that the discipline required to master any craft is the same discipline required to master yourself. You cannot rush sanding without ruining the finish. You cannot force wet clay into shape through impatience without collapsing the form. Craftsmanship demands patience, and, in demanding it over and over, it trains it, the same way lifting something heavy repeatedly trains a muscle. I think of a retired factory foreman who oversaw an assembly line for 40 years without ever building anything himself, who picked up woodworking at 65, almost as a joke, following a kit his grandson gave him for his birthday. The birdhouse came out crooked and barely functional. He said he was furious at a piece of wood for the first time in his life. Instead of quitting, he built another and another. 3 years later, he was building actual furniture for his extended family, and he said the proudest moment of his retirement, prouder than certain achievements from his working life, was the day his daughter asked him to build her dining table because she trusted his hands more than anything she could buy in a store. That's mastery built the only honest way, slowly, through repeated failure and repeated correction, which happens to be exactly how the Stoics believed virtue itself gets built. Hobbies 6, Mentorship and the Duty We Owe Each Other. The Stoics never believed in a philosophy of pure self-improvement sealed off from the world, though modern culture often imagines Stoicism that way, a kind of emotional armor for becoming untouchable. The actual Stoics believed almost the opposite. Marcus Aurelius wrote that human beings are made for cooperation, the way the upper and lower rows of teeth are made to work together, and that a life spent only on yourself, contributing nothing to anyone else, is a life only half-lived. This is why mentorship belongs on this list, and why it may be the most underrated practice available after 60. By this age, most people are sitting on decades of hard-earned, specific knowledge about a trade, a craft, a way of surviving hardship, a way of raising children, a way of running something well. In most modern societies, that knowledge simply evaporates unused because there's no natural bridge connecting the people who have it to the people who need it. Mentorship builds that bridge. It doesn't need to be formal. It can be as simple as spending real time with a grandchild, a niece or nephew, or a neighborhood kid, and actually teaching them something rather than just supervising them. This restores the sense of generativity we touched on earlier in a way almost nothing else can. You're not just filling hours, you're transmitting something. You're making yourself useful to the continuation of the world after you're gone from it. There's also a benefit here the Stoics wouldn't be embarrassed to admit is partly self-interested. Teaching sharpens your own understanding more than almost anything else. Seneca told Lucilius that in teaching others, we teach ourselves twice. The act of explaining an idea clearly forces you to understand it more clearly than you did before you tried. A retired engineer mentoring a young apprentice isn't only helping the apprentice, he's re-examining decades of his own knowledge, organizing it, testing it against new questions, keeping his own mind active in a way passive retirement never could. Think about what researchers call cognitive reserve, the brain's ability to withstand age-related change by having built dense, flexible neural networks across a lifetime of complex activity. Teaching is one of the most cognitively demanding things a person can do. It requires modeling another person's confusion, adjusting your explanation on the fly, responding patiently to the same question asked 3 different ways. It's a richer workout for the mind than almost anything else on this list. There's a retired nurse I think of, nearly 4 decades in the profession, who began volunteering at a community clinic not to work shifts, but to mentor newly graduated nurses through their hardest first months. She told me that during her working years, she never had time to slow down and explain why she made the clinical judgments she made. She simply made them under pressure and moved to the next patient. In retirement, mentoring finally gave her the chance to put that accumulated wisdom into words. "I spent 40 years being useful with my hands," she said. "Now I get to be useful with my mind, and somehow that feels like the better half of the job." That's Marcus Aurelius's cooperative view of human nature, made real in a hospital hallway, not isolated units chasing private comfort, but parts of one body working together for the whole. Hobby 7. Facing mortality through the body. The Stoics practiced something called memento mori, remember that you will die. To modern ears this sounds bleak, even morbid, but the Stoics used it as the exact opposite of despair. They used it as fuel for urgency, for gratitude, for living each day as though it genuinely mattered, because it does, and because there are, in fact, a finite number of them left. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself constantly about the shortness of life, reminding himself he could leave it at any moment, and that this fact should shape not what he feared, but what he did, said, and thought. He wrote that you could walk out of life right now, let that determine your actions. After 60, mortality stops being an abstract idea. It becomes a physical fact of the calendar. Friends begin to pass. Health becomes a daily conversation instead of a background assumption. Most people respond to this by looking away, filling their days with distraction to keep the fear at a safe distance. The 7th practice asks for the opposite, a structured, physical discipline that meets the body's limits directly instead of avoiding them. Something specific: swimming, Tai Chi, or a supervised strength program suited to your actual health, done consistently, several times a week, for as long as your life allows. Here's why this belongs at the top of the list, and why it's different from simply staying active. Swimming and Tai Chi in particular force direct, honest contact with your body's current capabilities, not the body you had at 30, not the body you wish you still had, but the one you actually have today. Water doesn't care what you used to be able to do. The slow, deliberate balance work of Tai Chi doesn't either. Both demand that you meet your body exactly where it is, with humility, and build from there. This is memento mori, made physical, each session a quiet acknowledgement. My body is aging, my time is limited, and rather than deny that or hide from it, I choose to meet it directly, with discipline and respect. The research here is remarkably consistent. Regular aerobic and balance-based movement in adults over 60 is tied to measurably slower physical and cognitive decline, reduced risk of falls, better cardiovascular outcomes, and significantly lower rates of depression and anxiety. Disciplined movement appears to directly counter the psychological weight that often comes with the daily awareness of aging. But the deeper Stoic reason to choose this practice goes past the health data. Seneca wrote that it isn't that life is short, but that we waste much of it, that life is long enough for anyone who knows how to use it. A physical discipline, practiced with the awareness that each session is a choice to use your time well rather than waste it, transforms exercise from a chore into something closer to a spiritual practice. You're not trying to live longer out of abstract fear. You're practicing living well, right now, in the body you actually have. There's an 81-year-old man whose story stayed with me. He took up swimming at 63, shortly after a heart scare that made death feel, in his words, like something standing in the room with him rather than a word in a book. He didn't swim to reverse aging. He understood clearly that time doesn't run backward. He swam because it was the 1 hour of his day. He felt entirely present, entirely alive, entirely in contact with the reality of his own body, instead of avoiding it. Nearly 20 years later, he still swims most mornings. "I'm not swimming away from death," he said. "I'm swimming toward being alive while I still am." That's memento mori used correctly, not as fear, but as clarity, bringing it together. Notice what all 7 of these share, because this is the actual point of everything we've covered. None of them promise to make you young again, in the way the world usually means it: unwrinkled, unslowed, unchanged. The Stoics never made that promise, and neither will I. What they offer instead is something more honest, a way of inhabiting whatever years remain with attention, discipline, purpose, and connection, instead of avoidance, drift, and the quiet fear of being forgotten. Walking teaches attention, reading teaches companionship across time, gardening teaches acceptance of what you can't control, journaling teaches honest self-examination, craftsmanship teaches patient mastery, mentorship teaches purposeful contribution, and physical discipline teaches honest contact with mortality itself. Together, they form a complete way of aging, built not around denial, but around the same 4 things Marcus Aurelius returned to again and again in his private notebook: wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. Each of these 7 practices, in its own quiet way, is a daily rehearsal of one or more of them. This is why the people who age with visible vitality and peace are almost never the ones who rested the hardest. They're the ones who found new forms of the same discipline that carried them through their working years and redirected it from obligation toward growth, from being needed by an employer toward being present, useful, and genuinely seen by the people around them. So here's the question worth sitting with tonight. Which one of these 7 will you actually start this week? Not someday, not when the weather improves. This week. Maybe it's tomorrow's walk without your phone. 5 things noticed you've never noticed before. Maybe it's 1 page of meditations before bed, notebook beside you for the lines that land. Maybe it's finally starting the nightly journal, 3 short questions, 10 minutes, before you sleep. Whatever you choose, the Stoics never asked for perfection. They asked for consistent, honest effort, applied daily, for as long as you have left. Marcus Aurelius wrote near the end of his life that it isn't death a person should fear, but never truly beginning to live. 60 isn't the closing of a door. It's very often the first genuinely open chapter. You've been given no job dictating your hours, no children needing constant supervision, simply you, your remaining time, and the choice of what to build with it. Choose with discipline, and I'll see you in the next one.